Imagine discovering a secret that forever changed how one of humanity's greatest writers viewed love and betrayal. In 1850, Fyodor Dostoevsky was sent to the Siberian gulags, condemned to 4 years of hard labor. There, among murderers, thieves, and revolutionaries, he witnessed something that would shatter his beliefs about female nature. What did these condemned men know about female loyalty that civilized society ignored? Why were their wives abandoning them, while common criminals received letters of eternal love? Dostoevsky observed a disturbing pattern that would later influence masterworks like Crime and Punishment and The Brothers Karamazov. This knowledge, forged in the Siberian ice among society's most despised, reveals brutal truths about attraction, status, and female psychology that few dare to admit. The revelation was so profound that it transformed not only his understanding of women, but reshaped Russian literature forever. Prepare to discover what the prisoners of Siberia taught the master of Russian literature about the hearts of women. A secret so raw and uncomfortable that it challenges everything we believe about love and loyalty. 1. The prison shock. What Dostoevsky saw in his first days. The iron gates slammed shut behind him, but the real prison bars weren't made of steel. They were made of shattered illusions about female nature. Dostoevsky entered the Siberian prison camp in 1850, believing he understood women. 4 years later, he would emerge knowing a truth so dark that it would haunt every word he ever wrote again. Within his first week, the brutal reality hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. Mail call revealed a pattern that defied everything civilized society had taught him about feminine loyalty. The educated prisoners, men who had sacrificed everything for noble causes, stood empty-handed, while murderers, rapists, and thieves eagerly read passionate love letters from devoted women. These weren't sympathy letters or dutiful family correspondence. They were burning declarations of desire from women who knew exactly what crimes these men had committed. Women who sent money, photographs, and promises of eternal faithfulness to men who had destroyed innocent lives with their bare hands. The more violent the criminal, the more passionate the letters became. Dostoevsky watched in sick fascination as one murderer received 3 separate proposals of marriage in a single day. This man had beaten his previous wife to death with a hammer, yet women were literally competing for the chance to become his next victim. They wrote about how his strength attracted them, how his dangerous nature made them feel alive, how they dreamed of taming such a powerful beast. Meanwhile, where were the wives and sweethearts of the political prisoners? Where were the refined ladies who had once claimed to share their revolutionary ideals? The silence was deafening. These women had vanished the moment their men could no longer provide status, protection, or resources. Their earlier declarations of love had been nothing more than social theater. The contrast revealed something horrifying about female psychology. When times were easy and the men were free, these women had played at being supportive partners. They attended secret meetings, whispered about justice and freedom, and basked in the reflected glory of their intellectual lovers. But the instant real hardship arrived, their true nature emerged, like a beast shedding its disguise. What shocked Dostoevsky most wasn't just the abandonment, it was the pattern of replacement. Through prison gossip, he learned that most of these abandoned wives hadn't remained alone. Within months of their husband's imprisonment, they had found new lovers. But they hadn't chosen other intellectuals or gentle souls. They had gravitating towards successful merchants, powerful officials, or wealthy landowners who could provide what their imprisoned husbands could not. The female mind, he realized, operated on principles that civilization tried to hide but could never truly suppress. Women weren't drawn to virtue, sacrifice, or noble intentions. They were attracted to power, dominance, and the ability to provide security. Everything else was just pretty words designed to conceal their true motivations. As days turned into weeks, Dostoevsky observed how even within the prison hierarchy, women's letters revealed their instincts. The criminals who received the most female attention weren't the smartest or most reformed, they were the most feared. They were men who had proven their willingness to use violence to get what they wanted. Their crimes weren't obstacles to female attraction, they were advertisements of masculine power. He began to understand that women had always been drawn to dangerous men, but society had created elaborate systems to hide this truth. Marriage laws, social conventions, and romantic literature all conspired to mask the reality that female desire was fundamentally amoral. Women didn't want good men. They wanted strong men who could dominate other men. The prison had stripped away all the comfortable lies. Here, without social masks or polite pretenses, raw female psychology was on full display. The letters to murderers weren't aberrations. They were honest expressions of what women had always wanted, but had been trained to conceal. Every night, as Dostoevsky lay in his freezing cell, listening to criminals read their love letters aloud, he felt his understanding of human nature fundamentally shift. The romantic notions he had carried about feminine virtue were dying, replaced by a darker knowledge that would transform his writing forever. Women didn't betray men despite their nature. They betrayed men because of their nature. 2. The letters that never came. The reality of abandoned intellectuals. The Daily Mail call became a public execution of masculine pride. Every morning, Dostoevsky and his fellow political prisoners would gather with desperate hope, only to watch it die as name after name was called, none belonging to the abandoned intellectuals who had once believed themselves loved. The silence spoke louder than any letter could have. While murderers tore open passionate declarations of devotion, the educated prisoners sat in growing humiliation, forced to confront a truth more painful than any physical torture. Their women had never truly loved them at all. What these men had mistaken for love had been something far more calculating. Their wives and sweethearts had been attracted to their status, their social position, their ability to provide excitement and prestige. The moment these men lost their freedom, their resources, and their social standing, the feminine mask slipped away to reveal the predator underneath. Dostoevsky remembered the salon gatherings where elegant ladies had gazed adoringly at revolutionary speakers. These same women had whispered about sacrificing everything for love, about standing by their men through any hardship, about loyalty being the highest feminine virtue. But when the test came, when their men actually needed them most, these declarations proved to be nothing but elaborate performances. The abandoned intellectuals began sharing their stories, and a horrifying pattern emerged. Their women hadn't just disappeared. They had systematically betrayed everything their men had held sacred. Wives were selling revolutionary documents to the authorities. Mistresses were sharing intimate secrets with government officials in exchange for protection. Some had even provided the evidence that led to their lovers' arrests. But the betrayal went deeper than mere abandonment. Through prison gossip and occasional letters from sympathetic friends, the men learned what had happened to their women after their imprisonment. None had retreated into lonely mourning. None had dedicated themselves to working for their men's release. Instead, they had immediately begun seeking new protectors. The speed of replacement revealed the shallow nature of their previous attachments. Women who had sworn eternal love were sharing beds with new men before their imprisoned lovers had even adjusted to prison life. They weren't grieving. They were hunting for better options. What made this betrayal even more devastating was the type of men these women chose as replacements. They didn't seek out other intellectuals or revolutionaries who shared their supposed ideals. Instead, they gravitated toward the very types of men their imprisoned lovers had fought against: wealthy merchants, government officials, successful businessmen who represented everything the revolutionaries had opposed. This pattern revealed something crucial about female psychology that society worked hard to conceal. Women's political opinions weren't based on genuine conviction, but on social positioning. They had supported revolutionary causes not because they believed in justice, but because it was fashionable among the intellectual class. The moment supporting those causes became costly, their true priorities emerged. Dostoevsky began to see that women were essentially practical creatures, driven by survival instincts that overrode any capacity for genuine loyalty. They formed attachments based on what men could provide: status, resources, protection, excitement. When a man could no longer deliver these benefits, the attachment dissolved, like sugar in rain. The intellectual prisoners had made a fatal error. They had projected their own capacity for abstract loyalty onto women who were incapable of such feelings. They had assumed that women could love ideas, principles, or men independent of immediate benefits. This assumption had led them to misinterpret female behavior entirely. As months passed without a single letter, these abandoned men faced a choice between madness and acceptance. Some broke down completely, unable to reconcile their romantic beliefs with the harsh reality of female nature. Others, like Dostoevsky, began the painful process of rebuilding their understanding of human psychology on more realistic foundations. The letters that never came taught a lesson more valuable than any that did arrive. They revealed that female loyalty was always conditional, always temporary, and always based on what men could provide rather than who men truly were. This knowledge was devastating to accept, but it was also liberating. Once a man understood the true nature of female attachment, he could stop wasting energy on futile hopes and focus on the harsh realities of survival. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 3. The Criminal's Paradox: Why Murderers Received More Love. The most disturbing discovery in that frozen hell wasn't the violence or the terrible living conditions. It was watching women throw themselves at the most dangerous men alive. Every day, Dostoevsky witnessed something that went against everything society taught about female nature. The worse the crime, the more passionate the love letters became. A man who had killed his entire family with an axe received more marriage proposals than a gentleman who had simply spoken out against the government. A thief who had terrorized villages for years got love poems from women who knew exactly what he had done. A rapist had 3 different women sending him money and begging him to choose them when he got out. This wasn't random or accidental. There was a clear pattern that made Dostoevsky's stomach turn. The most violent criminals were treated like kings by women who had never even met them. These women would write about how strong and powerful these men were, how exciting it must be to be with someone so dangerous, how they wanted to be the one woman who could handle such a beast. What made it even more twisted was that these women knew all the details of the crimes. They weren't being fooled or lied to. They had read the court records, heard the testimonies, knew exactly how many people had died and how brutally. And this knowledge didn't scare them away. It attracted them like moths to a flame. Meanwhile, men who had committed minor political crimes or simply had the wrong opinions got nothing. No letters, no visitors, no money, no hope. The contrast was so extreme, it seemed like some kind of sick joke. The men who had tried to make the world better were completely forgotten, while the men who had made it worse were celebrated. Dostoevsky began to understand that women weren't attracted to goodness, kindness, or virtue. They were attracted to power, and violence was the ultimate display of power. A man who could kill was a man who could dominate other men, who could take what he wanted, who didn't follow society's rules. To women, this represented the kind of masculine strength they craved deep down. The criminals themselves seemed to understand this better than anyone. They weren't surprised by the female attention. They expected it. They knew that their capacity for violence made them more attractive, not less. They understood something about female psychology that civilized men had been trained to ignore. These dangerous men didn't apologize for their crimes or try to appear reformed. In their letters back to women, they were often crude, demanding, and sometimes even threatening. But this harsh treatment only seemed to increase the women's devotion. The worse they were treated, the harder they tried to win these men's approval. What shocked Dostoevsky most was realizing this pattern existed outside prison too. He started remembering stories from his life before imprisonment. How women always seemed more interested in the bad boys, the rebels, the men who broke rules and took risks. The nice guys, the gentlemen, the providers were taken for granted while the dangerous ones were pursued with passion. The prison had simply stripped away all the social pretenses that normally hid this truth. In the outside world, women had to be more subtle about their preferences because society expected them to choose good men. But when writing to prisoners, they could be honest about what really attracted them. Raw, masculine power expressed through violence. This revelation changed how Dostoevsky saw every relationship he had ever witnessed. All those marriages between nice, stable men and women who seemed content but never passionate. The women were settling for security while dreaming of excitement. All those affairs where women left good husbands for dangerous lovers. They were following their true nature instead of social expectations. The criminal's paradox revealed that female attraction operated on primitive instincts that civilization tried to suppress but could never eliminate. Women were programmed to be attracted to men who could dominate and protect them, even if that same capacity for dominance made these men dangerous to everyone else. As Dostoevsky watched murderers read passionate love letters while decent men sat abandoned, he realized he was witnessing the raw truth about female sexuality that society worked desperately to hide. Women didn't want to be treated well. They wanted to be conquered by men strong enough to conquer others. The letters to criminals weren't aberrations, they were honest expressions of what women had always secretly desired. 4. The female jungle law. The instinct nobody wants to admit. Deep in that Siberian prison, Dostoevsky discovered something that civilization spent enormous energy trying to hide. Women operate by jungle rules that have nothing to do with the moral codes they claim to follow. Watching female behavior through the lens of prison correspondence revealed instincts so primitive and brutal that they challenged every romantic notion about feminine nature. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Women weren't writing to the kindest prisoners, the most reformed ones, or the men who showed the most remorse. They were writing to the apex predators, the men who had proven their willingness to destroy anyone who stood in their way. This wasn't about rehabilitation or seeing good in bad men. This was about raw attraction to male dominance in its most extreme form. What disturbed Dostoevsky most was how these women talked about violence in their letters. They didn't express horror or try to reform these men. Instead, they wrote about how exciting it was to be with someone so powerful, how safe they would feel with a man who could eliminate any threat, how they dreamed of being chosen by someone so strong that other men feared him. The female mind, he realized, operated on a completely different moral system than the one society claimed women followed. While men created laws, ethics, and civilized behavior, women remained secretly loyal to older rules, the rules of the jungle where only the strongest survived and reproduced. Their attraction wasn't broken or corrupted. It was functioning exactly as nature designed it. This explained so much about female behavior that had previously confused him. Why did women claim to want nice guys, but then lose interest in men who were too kind? Why did they complain about bad boys, but keep choosing them? Why did they say they valued gentleness, but respond with passion to dominance? The answer was simple. They were following instincts that overrode their conscious minds. In the prison environment, these instincts became impossible to hide. There were no social expectations forcing women to pretend they were attracted to virtue. No family pressure to choose providers over predators, no economic necessity to marry for security rather than excitement. When writing to prisoners, women could follow their true desires without consequences, and those desires revealed their real nature. The jungle law that governed female attraction was brutally simple. Strength attracts, weakness repels. But strength wasn't measured by character, intelligence, or moral courage. It was measured by the ability to dominate other males through force or the threat of force. A man who had killed was automatically higher in the hierarchy than a man who had merely spoken against authority. This hierarchy existed in the outside world too, but it was disguised by social conventions. In prison, it became crystal clear. The murderers were at the top, receiving the most female attention. Below them were thieves and violent criminals. At the bottom were the political prisoners and intellectuals, men whose crimes were crimes of conscience rather than displays of physical dominance. What made this discovery so disturbing was realizing that women were completely unaware of their own instincts. They genuinely believed they were making conscious choices based on attraction to personality or character. They had no idea they were being controlled by programming that valued the capacity for violence above all other masculine traits. The letters revealed another dark truth. Women were attracted to men who were dangerous specifically to other people, not to them. They wanted to be the exception, the one woman who could tame the beast, the special one who would be protected rather than destroyed by this violent man. They were excited by the idea of being chosen by someone who rejected everyone else. This explained why kindness was often seen as weakness by women. A man who was gentle to everyone was seen as lacking the selectivity that marked a true predator. But a man who was cruel to others while being protective of his woman was demonstrating exactly the kind of discriminating dominance that triggered female attraction. Dostoevsky began to see that every romantic story, every love song, every notion of chivalrous behavior was society's attempt to redirect these dangerous instincts into more civilized channels. But the underlying programming remained unchanged. Women were still attracted to warriors and conquerors. They just had to find more socially acceptable ways to express these desires. The jungle law couldn't be argued with or educated away. It was hardwired into female psychology at a level deeper than conscious thought. Understanding this law didn't make it less disturbing. It just made female behavior predictable for the first time in Dostoevsky's life. 5. The invisible status, how prison revealed the true hierarchy. Behind prison walls, all the fake social rankings disappeared, and the real hierarchy emerged like bones through rotting flesh. Dostoevsky watched in fascination as women's letters revealed a ranking system that had nothing to do with money, education, or social class, and everything to do with raw masculine power. In the outside world, a banker might outrank a farmer, and a professor might be more respected than a factory worker, but women's prison correspondence told a different story entirely. The hierarchy they responded to was ancient, brutal, and completely honest about what really mattered in the game of attraction. At the very top were the killers, men who had taken lives with their own hands. These weren't accidental deaths or crimes of passion that could be explained away. These were men who had looked other human beings in the eye and chosen to end their existence. To women, this represented the ultimate expression of masculine dominance. Below them came the violent criminals, men who had beaten, robbed, and terrorized others, but stopped short of murder. They still received plenty of female attention, but not quite the worshipful devotion reserved for actual killers. Women seemed to instinctively understand the difference between men who could kill and men who merely could hurt. Next were the thieves and con men, criminals who used cunning and courage to take what they wanted from others. While not physically violent, they had proven their willingness to break society's rules to get what they needed. This rule-breaking ability attracted women who were bored by men who always followed orders. At the bottom of this invisible hierarchy were the political prisoners and intellectuals. Despite their education, their noble intentions, and their sacrifice for higher ideals, they were seen as the weakest men in the entire prison. Their crimes were crimes of conscience, not displays of power, and women found nothing attractive about conscience. What shocked Dostoevsky was how perfectly women understood this hierarchy without anyone explaining it to them. They didn't need to study criminal records or analyze case files. Something deep in their minds automatically ranked these men based on their capacity for dominance, and their attraction followed that ranking with mathematical precision. The letters themselves revealed this hierarchy in brutal detail. Women writing to killers used language filled with awe and submission. They wrote about feeling honored to be noticed by such powerful men, about how safe they would feel under their protection, about how exciting it would be to belong to someone so feared by other men. Letters to lesser criminals were still passionate but carried less reverence. These women saw potential in their chosen men, but weren't quite as overwhelmed by their dominance. They wrote more about taming and reforming, as if these men needed some improvement to reach the top tier. The few letters that went to non-violent criminals were practical rather than passionate. These women wrote about business arrangements, about what they could gain from the relationship, about practical concerns rather than burning desire. The raw attraction was missing. And the political prisoners, the silence was their ranking. In the female mind, men who fought with ideas instead of fists, who sacrificed for abstract principles instead of concrete gains, who chose suffering over success, these men had disqualified themselves from consideration entirely. This invisible status system explains so much about female behavior in the outside world too. Why did women lose interest in men who were too agreeable? Because agreement signaled low status in the dominance hierarchy. Why were they attracted to men who seemed slightly dangerous or unpredictable? Because these traits suggested the capacity for dominance. The prison environment had stripped away all the social camouflage that normally hid this hierarchy. In regular society, wealth, education, and social position could mask a man's true rank in the dominant system. But in prison, where all men were equally stripped of external resources, only raw masculine power remained, and women responded to that power with perfect accuracy. Dostoevsky realized that every interaction between men and women was really about this hidden ranking system. Women were constantly, unconsciously measuring men's position in the dominance hierarchy and adjusting their behavior accordingly. They couldn't help themselves. It was programmed too deep to resist. The most disturbing part was that women seemed completely unaware they were doing this. They genuinely believed they were choosing men based on personality, character, or emotional connection. They had no idea their attraction was being controlled by ancient programming that valued the capacity for violence above all other masculine traits. This invisible hierarchy wasn't fair, wasn't moral, and wasn't something that could be changed by education or social progress. It was hardwired into female psychology at a level deeper than conscious thought, and it would continue operating regardless of what women claimed to want or what society said they should desire. 6. Lessons from the House of the Dead. What the condemned knew about women. The murderers and thieves possessed knowledge about women that centuries of poetry and philosophy had failed to capture. These condemned men, society's rejects, understood female psychology better than the most educated gentlemen, and their success with women proved it every single day. While intellectuals wrote romantic theories about love and devotion, criminals lived by practical rules that actually worked. They knew women responded to strength, not kindness. They knew female loyalty was earned through dominance, not devotion. They knew that treating women too well was the fastest way to lose their interest. The first lesson these men taught through their actions was simple: never apologize for your nature. The political prisoners constantly tried to explain themselves, to justify their actions, to appear reformed and worthy of forgiveness. The criminals never bothered. They wrote to women exactly as they were, crude, demanding, sometimes threatening, and women responded with increasing passion. One killer told Dostoevsky something that haunted him for years. "Smart men think too much about what women say they want. Stupid men like me just watch what they actually do. And what they do is chase after the men who treat them worst." This observation, coming from a man who couldn't even read properly, cut deeper than any philosophical treatise. The condemned men understood that women tested men constantly, usually without realizing they were doing it. They would make demands, create drama, or act unreasonably to see how the man would respond. Weak men would try to please them, negotiate, or apologize. Strong men would simply refuse to play the game, and that refusal was what women actually wanted to see. These criminals had learned through trial and error that female attraction worked backwards from what society claimed. Being too available made women lose interest. Being too agreeable made them feel contempt. Being too generous made them take advantage. The men who received the most passionate letters were the ones who were least accommodating to female whims. Another lesson that emerged from watching these interactions was that women were attracted to men who had other options. The criminals who received letters from multiple women were the most desired by each individual woman. Competition didn't drive women away. It made them fight harder for attention. The political prisoners, who desperately needed just one letter, got none, partly because their neediness was repulsive to female psychology. The condemned men also understood something crucial about female psychology that educated men missed. Women wanted to feel chosen by someone who didn't need them, not pursued by someone who did. The difference was subtle, but crucial. A man who pursued showed weakness. A man who selected showed strength. These insights weren't learned from books or theories. They were earned through brutal experience. Men who understood female nature thrived even in prison, while men who believed in romantic ideals suffered in isolation. The gap between what worked and what was supposed to work couldn't have been clearer. What made these lessons even more powerful was that they came from men who had nothing left to lose. They couldn't offer women money, status, or security. All they had was their raw, masculine presence, and somehow that was enough to inspire devotion that surpassed anything the intellectuals had ever received when they were free and prosperous. The criminals revealed that much of what passed for romance in civilized society was actually negotiation. Men offering resources in exchange for female companionship. But when those resources were stripped away, only genuine attraction remained. And that attraction followed rules that had nothing to do with fairness, morality, or what anyone claimed to believe about love. One of the most disturbing lessons was that women were more honest about their desires when writing to prisoners than they had ever been in regular relationships. The social pressure to appear virtuous was gone, so they could admit their attraction to dangerous, dominant men without shame. This honesty revealed that most of their previous behavior had been performance. The condemned men had accidentally discovered the truth that pick-up artists and seducers would later systematically exploit. Female attraction was triggered by specific behaviors that had little connection to being a good person or a suitable partner. Understanding these triggers was more effective than any amount of genuine affection or sincere devotion. Perhaps the most chilling lesson of all was that these men didn't even particularly like women. They just understood them. Their success wasn't based on emotional connection or genuine care, but on psychological manipulation refined through years of practice. They had turned female psychology into a game they could win, even from behind bars. As Dostoevsky absorbed these lessons, he realized he was witnessing the education that every man needed, but that society refused to provide. The condemned men of Siberia knew secrets about women that could transform any man's life, if he had the stomach to accept truths that destroyed every romantic illusion he had ever held. 7. The writer's transformation. How this discovery changed his work. The man who entered that Siberian prison and the man who emerged 4 years later were completely different people. Dostoevsky had gone in believing in the nobility of human nature, especially feminine virtue. He came out understanding that beneath civilization's thin veneer lay drives and instincts that were far darker and more primitive than anyone wanted to admit. Everything he wrote after prison carried the weight of this brutal education. His female characters were no longer innocent angels or devoted wives waiting faithfully at home. They became complex, dangerous creatures, driven by needs they themselves didn't fully understand. The transformation was so complete that critics noticed immediately. His women had become real in a way that made readers uncomfortable. Before prison, his female characters had been idealized versions of womanhood, pure, loyal, and morally superior to men. After witnessing the truth about female psychology, he began creating women who were attracted to dangerous men, who betrayed good husbands for exciting lovers, who were driven by instincts that overrode their moral training. These weren't villains. They were honest portraits of female nature. The change showed up first in his notebooks, where he wrote obsessively about the patterns he had observed. Page after page analyzed why women chose criminals over intellectuals, why they were attracted to strength over kindness, why their loyalty was always conditional on what they could gain. These observations would later become the psychological foundation for his greatest works. His approach to male characters changed just as dramatically. Gone were the naive romantic heroes who believed in feminine virtue. His new male protagonists were men who understood the game being played, who recognized female nature for what it really was, who had learned to navigate the complex dynamics of attraction and power that actually governed relationships. The prison experience had taught him that most literature about love was fantasy, written by men who had never seen women under stress, never watched them choose between security and passion, never observed their behavior when social expectations were removed. His new mission became showing readers what human nature actually looked like when the masks came off. This transformation wasn't just intellectual, it was deeply personal. The abandonment by his former social circle, the silence from women who had once admired him, the contrast with how female attention flowed to violent criminals, all of this had cut deep wounds that never fully healed. His writing became a way of processing trauma that society refused to acknowledge existed. Critics who read his new work were disturbed by what they found. His female characters no longer behaved according to social expectations. They made choices that seemed immoral, but were psychologically accurate. They were attracted to the wrong men for reasons they couldn't explain. They betrayed good men not because they were evil, but because their instincts drove them towards strength and dominance. The most shocking change was in how he wrote about love itself. Romance was no longer portrayed as a meeting of souls or a triumph of virtue. It became a battlefield where primitive instincts clashed with social expectations, where the strongest survived and the gentlest were consumed. Love was revealed as a form of psychological warfare that women usually won because they understood the rules better. His male readers began to recognize truths in his work that they had experienced but never seen written down. The way women lost interest when men were too available. The way they created drama to test masculine strength. The way they claimed to want one thing, but responded passionately to the opposite. Finally, someone was writing about the reality they lived instead of the fantasy society promoted. But female readers had a different reaction. Many were outraged by his portrayals, claiming he was unfair to women, that he was bitter and twisted by his experiences. Their anger confirmed what he had learned. Women hated having their true nature exposed because it threatened the social arrangements that worked in their favor. The transformation went deeper than just character creation. His entire worldview had shifted from idealistic to realistic, from romantic to psychological, from believing what people said to observing what they actually did. This change infused every aspect of his later work with a depth and authenticity that made him one of the greatest writers who ever lived. What made his transformation so powerful was that it came from direct observation rather than theory. He hadn't read about these truths in books. He had lived them, suffered through them, been broken by them, and rebuilt stronger. His authority came from pain, which gave his insights a weight that academic theories could never match. The writer who emerged from that frozen hell possessed knowledge that most men never gained and most never wanted. He understood the darker currents that flowed beneath civilized behavior, the primitive drives that controlled human action, the uncomfortable truths that society worked desperately to hide. This knowledge made him a better writer, but a lonelier man. 8. The final secret. The truth Dostoevsky carried into his novels. The ultimate revelation that haunted every page Dostoevsky wrote after Siberia was this: female loyalty was not broken by circumstances, it was revealed by them. The prison had not corrupted women or changed their nature. It had simply stripped away the social pretenses that normally concealed what they had always been. This final secret was more disturbing than any individual betrayal or abandoned letter. It meant that every relationship, every marriage, every declaration of love was built on conditions that most people refused to acknowledge. Women didn't love men. They loved what men could provide, how men made them feel, what status men could grant them. When those benefits disappeared, so did the love. The Secret explained why his greatest novels became studies in psychological realism that shocked readers with their accuracy. Characters like Nastasia Filipovna didn't choose Prince Mishkin's goodness over Rogozhin's violence because women actually preferred goodness. She was torn between security and excitement, between what she knew she should want and what her instincts demanded. The struggle wasn't moral, it was biological. In Crime and Punishment, Sonia's devotion to Raskolnikov wasn't pure love conquering evil. It was female attraction to masculine dominance, expressing itself through religious language. She was drawn to his capacity for violence, his willingness to transgress society's rules, his position as the most dangerous man she had ever met. Her love was real, but its source was the same primitive programming that drew women to criminals. The brothers Karamazov revealed the secret most completely through Grushenka, who couldn't choose between the brothers because each represented different aspects of masculine power. Dmitri offered physical dominance and passion, even provided intellectual superiority and mystery. Alyosha promised spiritual authority and moral strength. She was attracted to all of them because each displayed different forms of the dominance that triggered female desire. What made this secret so devastating was realizing that women themselves didn't understand their own nature. They genuinely believed they were making conscious choices based on character and compatibility. They had no idea they were being controlled by programming that evaluated men purely as potential sources of strength, status, and genetic advantage. The Final Secret also explained why his books made readers so uncomfortable. He was showing them truths about human nature that everyone recognized, but nobody wanted to admit. His female characters behaved exactly like real women, which was disturbing because real female behavior didn't match society's romantic myths about feminine virtue and loyalty. This knowledge had cost him everything: his freedom, his health, his illusions, his faith in human goodness. But it had also given him the ability to see through the lies that most people lived by. He could write about love without sentimentality, about women without idealization, about human nature without the comforting delusions that made life bearable for others. The secret had practical implications that extended far beyond literature. If female attraction was based on strength rather than virtue, then men needed to understand the rules of the game they were actually playing rather than the game they thought they were playing. Nice guys didn't finish last because women were broken. They finished last because niceness signaled weakness in a competition where only strength mattered. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the final secret was that it made traditional morality seem almost irrelevant to the actual dynamics of human relationships. Being good, kind, faithful, and honest might make a man a better person, but it wouldn't necessarily make him more attractive to women. In fact, it might make him less attractive by signaling that he lacked the ruthless edge that primitive female instincts were designed to detect. The secret also revealed why social institutions like marriage required legal and religious enforcement to function. If female loyalty was naturally conditional and temporary, then society needed artificial systems to maintain family stability. Marriage wasn't a celebration of love. It was a contract designed to overcome female nature's tendency toward hypergamy and betrayal. As Dostoevsky aged, this secret became both his burden and his power. He could see through every social interaction, predict every romantic triangle, understand every marital crisis, because he knew the hidden forces that actually drove human behavior. But this knowledge also isolated him from people who preferred their comfortable illusions to uncomfortable truths. The final secret that emerged from those frozen Siberian years was that everything civilized society taught about love, loyalty, and feminine nature was wrong, not mistaken, deliberately false, designed to hide truths that would destabilize the social order if widely understood. Women didn't betray men despite their nature. They were loyal to their nature, which prioritized strength over goodness, dominance over devotion, and genetic advantage over moral character. This was the knowledge that transformed a romantic young writer into one of the most psychologically penetrating authors in human history. The secret was simple but devastating. In the game of attraction, women were playing by ancient rules, while men were playing by modern lies. Understanding this truth could free men from endless confusion and futile hope, but it could also destroy every cherished belief about love that made life worth living. The most dangerous truth is not that women betray. It's that they remain perfectly loyal to a nature we've been taught to deny exists.